Assalamu alaikum, my dear students. So today in this class we are going to discuss about the growth hormone, the actions of growth hormone. Okay, so we already know that this growth hormone is released from the anterior pituitary gland. Okay, so here is our hypothalamus. We have discussed this now so many times. Here is the hypothalamus, and then there is the infundibulum, the connection between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, and then here is the pituitary gland. This is the anterior pituitary, and here is the posterior pituitary. Fine. Now we already know that the hypothalamus is composed of various nuclei. There are different nuclei which are present in the hypothalamus, and one of the important nuclei which is present there, one of the important nucleus actually which is present there, is the arcuate nucleus. And this arcuate nucleus is secreting an important hormone, and that hormone is called as growth hormone releasing hormone. GHRH, growth hormone releasing hormone. Now there should be some stimulus which is stimulating this arcuate nucleus to secrete this growth hormone releasing hormone. So first let us talk about those stimuli which are stimulating this hypothalamus, or which are stimulating this arcuate nucleus to secrete this growth hormone releasing hormone. The first important stimulus for that is increased level of amino acids in the blood. Okay, then the second thing is the decreased level of glucose in the blood. Okay, the third stimulus is decreased level of fatty acids in the blood. Then definitely when there is decreased level of growth hormone, that also stimulates this, and one of the important stimulus is also the exercise. Okay, so all these are the stimuli which stimulates the arcuate nucleus, and then the arcuate nucleus is secreting this hormone which is called as growth hormone releasing hormone. Now the name indicates what will be the action of this growth hormone releasing hormone. Fine. Now this growth hormone releasing hormone, once secreted from the hypothalamus, from the arcuate nucleus, now it reaches to the anterior pituitary. Okay, and anterior pituitary, to reach the anterior pituitary there is a special pathway here, and that is the hypophyseal portal system. And hypophyseal portal system has these primary capillaries and the secondary capillaries, right? I hope you remember that. Now this growth hormone releasing hormone is there in this hypophyseal portal system, and then through this hypophyseal portal system it reaches the anterior pituitary. Now here is the growth hormone releasing hormone, and this growth hormone releasing hormone through this hypophyseal portal system is reaching the anterior pituitary gland, and in the anterior pituitary this growth hormone releasing hormone acts on a spatial cell. And that spatial cell we have already discussed in the class of the pituitary gland. And then growth hormone releasing hormone, it acts on this cell, and this cell is called as somatotrope. Somatotrope. And once this growth hormone releasing hormone, it stimulates this somatotrope now releases a hormone, and that hormone is called as growth hormone. Now that growth hormone is there in the general circulation. Okay, one more time. There is the hypothalamus In hypothalamus there is arcuate nucleus, and that arcuate nucleus secretes a hormone that is called as growth hormone releasing hormone. And why it stimulates this growth hormone releasing hormone? There are various stimuli which stimulates this arcuate nucleus. When there is increased amino acid level in the blood, when there is decreased glucose level, when there is decreased fatty acid level, when there is the exercise, and that exercise is also one stimulus for this arcuate nucleus to release growth hormone releasing hormone. Now growth hormone releasing hormone is secreted from the arcuate nucleus, then through the hypophyseal portal system it reaches the anterior pituitary, and anterior pituitary where it finds a cell which is called as somatotrope, and it stimulates the somatotrope. Once the somatotrope is stimulated, it releases a hormone which is called as growth hormone. Now this growth hormone has different actions in our body. Okay, the first action we are going to talk about is this on this spatial tissue here, which is called as adipose tissue. Okay, now this growth hormone acts on this adipose tissue. Okay, and this adipose tissue, we already know that these adipose tissues are the sites for fat storage, and for example we have the triglycerides in these adipocytes. Now what this growth hormone is doing in the adipose tissue, it stimulates a process which is called as lipolysis. Okay, that is break down the fats. What it is doing is it is breaking down the triglycerides into the glycerol and free fatty acids. Fine. So now these triglycerides are being broken down. It activates an enzyme there which is called as hormone sensitive lipase, and that enzyme is secreted there, activated there, and that enzyme is activated there, and that enzyme actually breaks down these triglycerides into glycerol and free fatty acids. Now this glycerol and free fatty acids जो है they move into the blood. Fine, we have the glycerol and we have the free fatty acids. Okay, now one thing we have done here, we have increased the fatty acid level in the blood. Okay, so there was decreased fatty acid level in the blood which stimulated the arcuate nucleus to release growth hormone releasing hormone, and we have released the growth hormone, and growth hormone has increased the free fatty acid level in the blood by acting on these adipocytes, and adipocytes mein there is the triglycerides being converted into glycerol and free fatty acids. Okay, now what happens to this glycerol? This glycerol actually moves to the liver, where this glycerol is used in a process which is called as gluconeogenesis. Okay, so this glycerol is used in a process called as gluconeogenesis, and gluconeogenesis is formation of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. You all know that, and we have the decreased glucose level which actually stimulated this process. Okay, so decreased glucose level, so we need to form more and more glucose. Okay, so glucose is being formed from non-carbohydrate sources, and for that process we are using this glycerol, and where from this glycerol is coming, it is coming from the adipocytes by the action of growth hormone. Okay, now gluconeogenesis, we are forming the glucose, okay, and that glucose moves into the blood. Okay, so now we have increased the glucose level in the blood. Fine. Now this growth hormone, apart from these adipocytes, it has its action mainly on the liver actually. Fine. Now this growth hormone, it moves to liver, and in liver we have the hepatocytes. Okay, we have the hepatocytes. Now this growth hormone, it acts on these hepatocytes, and it acts through a special pathway, through a special mechanism. That mechanism is called as Jackstat mechanism. Okay, now Jackstat mechanism is, Jack stands for Janus kinases. Okay, and stat stands for signal transducer, and activator of transcription proteins. Okay, and it actually there is a special receptor for this growth hormone in these hepatocytes. Once this growth hormone binds on this receptor which is present on the hepatocyte, it actually activates the Janus kinases inside. And what this Janus kinase is doing, it is phosphorylating this receptor, the internal domain of this receptor. Okay, and it eventually activates or phosphorylates this stat. It activates the signal transducer and activator of transcription proteins. Okay, and what this stat is doing, it is going inside the nucleus and acting on the particular genes inside the nucleus. One more time. This growth hormone from the bloodstream, it first goes to adipocytes, and it has its main role actually on the liver. Okay, and liver contains these hepatocytes. Hepatocytes has this receptor for this growth hormone, and once this growth hormone binds on the receptor, it activates this Janus kinase inside. This Janus kinase activates the internal domain, or it phosphorylates the internal domain of this receptor. Then it attracts this stat, that is signal transducer of and activator of transcription protein. Now this is also phosphorylated or kind of activated. Now this stat, once activated, it goes inside the nucleus and acts on the particular genes. Okay, and initiates a process of transcription there. Fine, and transcription, once that transcription is done, there is the formation of mRNA. That mRNA comes out, and there is the process of translation, and there is a formation of protein. Okay, fine. Now what this stat is doing, this Jackstat mechanism is eventually doing, it is initiating the process of protein synthesis. Okay, that is, it acts on the specific genes inside the nucleus. There is the process of transcription, then that mRNA comes out of the nucleus, then that mRNA is being translated into a protein. That is the process of translation, and we are forming that protein, and that protein is called as insulin-like growth factor 1. Insulin-like growth factor 1. Okay, that is IGF-1. Fine, so that is insulin-like growth factor 1. So insulin-like growth factor is a protein, and that protein is formed by this mechanism which is called as Jackstat mechanism, and that Jackstat mechanism starts when this growth hormone binds on this receptor on the hepatocyte. Fine. Now we have this insulin-like growth factor 1, and this insulin-like growth factor 1 is now in the blood circulation, and through the blood circulation it reaches to these two target organs. Okay, the first target organ is this cell here. This is the muscle cell. Okay, this is the muscle cell here. Now what happens is, this insulin-like growth factor comes and it acts on this muscle cell. It has the receptor here, and this insulin-like growth factor acts on the muscle cell, and it also acts on the on actually it also starts a process of transcription and then the process of translation, and that leads to formation of one protein. Okay, it also actually leads to a formation of a protein, this insulin-like growth factor, inside the muscle cell. Fine, and that protein is actually a spatial channel. That is a channel protein or transporter protein here. Okay, now one more time, this insulin-like growth factor, once formed in the liver, that goes into the circulation, then it moves to these target organs. The first target organ is the muscle cell. This muscle cell has the receptor for this insulin-like growth factor. Once it binds, it activates this cell, or it activates certain genes inside and leads to a formation of a protein. First the process of transcription, then the process of translation in the cytoplasm. And then this protein which is formed here is actually a membrane protein, which is a spatial channel, and this is the channel for the amino acids. This is the channel for the amino acids. I hope you remember what was here, the stimulus for arcuate nucleus. There were increased amino acid level in the blood. Fine, so we have to reduce that amino acid level in the blood because it is increased there. Fine. Now these amino acids move from blood into this muscle cell through this spatial channel which was formed here, and now we have amino acids in the cell. Fine, and then these amino acids are utilized inside, and they are utilized for the formation of proteins. And these proteins can be contractile proteins or structural proteins, which actually increases the size of the muscles. Okay, muscle growth, for muscle growth, which are utilized actually. Fine. So we have taken the amino acids from the bloodstream into the muscle cell, and those amino acids were utilized for the formation of proteins, and those proteins actually are helpful for the muscle growth. Right? Then this insulin-like growth factor not only acts on the muscle cells, it also acts on the bones. Fine. Now what it is doing inside the bones is, this insulin-like growth factor acts on the bones, and in the bones we have two types of cells actually. We have osteoblasts and we have osteoclasts. Osteoblasts and osteoclasts, which are actually involved in the bone deposition and bone resorption. Fine. So what this insulin-like growth factor is doing inside the bones, it increases the activity of osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Fine. And once it increases the activity of osteoblasts and osteoclasts, it actually increases a process which is called as endochondral ossification. And endochondral ossification, that leads to increase in the bone growth, or that leads to bone growth. Fine. Then just like these muscles, this insulin-like growth factor is involved in the synthesis of proteins inside the bones. For example, we have the collagen inside the bones. Okay, the formation of that collagen inside the bones is stimulated by this insulin-like growth factor. So overall result in the bones is also the bone growth. Fine. Then this insulin-like growth factor has its effect on this epiphyseal plate also. The epiphyseal plate which is present in between the epiphysis and diaphysis in the long bones. Fine. So here is the epiphyseal plate. Okay, and in the epiphyseal plate we have the chondrocytes. And what this insulin-like growth factor is doing on the chondrocytes is, it actually leads to the increase in the size of the chondrocytes, and it leads to the process of proliferation. and these chondrocytes में जो है one more process is there that is called as differentiation, and these chondrocytes are differentiated into the bone cells, fine, and that that leads to increase in the length of the bones, fine. Once there is the increase in the cells of the chondrocytes, then there is proliferation, there is cell division, and then those cells, those chondrocytes are differentiated into bone cells, into osteoblasts for example, and then that leads to the increase in the length of the bone, of the long bone. Fine. Now, one more time, we are quickly revising all these actions of the growth hormone in our body. Once this growth hormone is released, why it was released? Because this cell was stimulated by growth hormone releasing hormone. And growth hormone releasing hormone was secreted by arcuate nucleus, and the stimulus for that, or stimuli for that, was increased amino acid level, decreased glucose level, decreased fatty acid level, and the exercise. Fine. Once this growth hormone is released by this somatotrope, this growth hormone acts on the adipocytes, and adipocytes may it leads to the process of lipolysis, and lipolysis may we from the triglycerides for example we get the glycerol and fatty acids, free fatty acids. These free fatty acids move to the blood, so we are increasing the fatty acid level in the blood, and this glycerol from the blood it moves to the liver, where it is utilized in the process of gluconeogenesis, and gluconeogenesis is the formation of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. So we are forming the glucose and sending that into the blood, so we are increasing the blood glucose level. Fine. Then this growth hormone also has its effect on the hepatocyte or on the liver cells. Fine. And in the liver cells it acts by a special mechanism which is called as Jackstat mechanism. Jack stands for Janus kinase, and stat stands for signal transducer and activator of transcription proteins. And by this Jackstat mechanism, what happens is it leads to the process of transcription and translation. Then when protein is formed there, that protein is called as insulin-like growth factor 1. And that insulin-like growth factor has its action on the bones and muscles in particular. And on the muscles, what it is doing is it leads to the formation of a protein, and that protein acts as a channel protein, and that is the special channel for amino acids. And amino acids from the blood are taken into the muscle cell, where they are utilized for the synthesis of proteins, and that leads to the muscle growth. Then this insulin-like growth factor, that it has its effect on the bones also. What it is doing in the bones, it is increasing the activity of osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Fine. And once the osteoblast and osteoclastic activity is increased, it leads to the process of endochondral ossification, and it leads to the bone growth. Fine. Then this insulin-like growth factor is also responsible for the formation of proteins inside the bone, for example collagen. Then this insulin-like growth factor also has its effect on this part of the bone, which is called as epiphyseal plate. Okay, on the cartilage actually, epiphyseal plate, where we have the chondrocytes. So it is acting on the chondrocytes, and it increases the size of the chondrocytes. Then it leads to the proliferation of chondrocytes, and then the differentiation of chondrocytes. Okay, and after all these processes, what is the overall result here is the length of the bone is increased by this insulin-like growth factor. That is all for the actions of growth hormone. See you in the next class. Thank you.